But later on I start reading the writings of another man who inspired me greatly. This was a man who made the first continuous ascent of all Scotland's 3,000-foot mountains, all Scotland's Munros, and wrote an absolutely wonderful book about it called Hamish's Mountain Walk. And I'm delighted that Hamish is here today to say a few words about Tom. So could you put your hands together and give a big warm welcome to Hamish Brown?
Between Cameron and Tom, so I'll bring it down a wee bit. Cameron makes you really feel old when he sort of gives his dates, because I knew Tom right back just after the war. And my first connection with him was reading that marvellous first book he ever wrote, a book called Highland Days. And it told the stories of what he did as a teenager and afterwards, before the war, and again just after the war. And it's marvellous, simple writing about adventuring in Scotland. A Scotland which has changed absolutely beyond belief now. The book's still in print, so order a copy sometime. And meeting him through that book inspired me as well. I was already like Tom. Family didn't have a car or anything those days. At the end of the war, just after, we jumped on our bikes and we toured Scotland. I did it by bike and hike, as I used to call it, and it was great fun. And this self-propelling thing is something which I feel we've, in many ways, lost a bit today. But Tom also did this in another very important way, which is glossed over or not mentioned at all, and that's the history of climbing in the Himalayas. It was Douglas Scott, Tom Weir, Tom McKinnon, and who else? W.H. Murray, formed a group of 4 lads. 3 of them gave up their jobs just after the war to go and climb in the Himalayas. One of those group, W.H. Murray, the next year got seconded, as it were, and went off with a bloke called Hillary and Shipton and reconnoitred the route that eventually, 2 years later, they climbed Everest. Tom McKinnon, a few years later, was a very important person in the first ascent of the 3rd highest mountain in the world, Kinchinjunga. You know, it sprung from that little initiative. There was no sponsoring, no big society. You know, things nowadays, that sort of thing are all done from London. But here were 4 Scots lads just up and going. And that's something which I think Tom should be given a lot more credit for. He also climbed quite a lot of other places in the world. He went to Corsica, Kurdistan, and he went twice to Morocco. He went there with Douglas Scott the first time, and then they went back a few years later to do a film. And that was to influence me even more than Highland Days did, because I was getting a sabbatical winter term off at the time, and I wondered where to go, and Tom made Morocco sound so lovely that I went to the Atlas Mountains. And I've been back there almost every year since. It's become my sort of special place. So these are how you get these influences. And then during that time as well, Cameron's mentioned his tremendous TV program. It was hard going. After some of these early escapades abroad, these big expeditions, his wings were clipped, rather. You don't make a lot of money writing, not even with a monthly column in the Scots magazine. But television came along, and that made a world of difference. I was very lucky that I spent all through the 60s taking youngsters into the wilds and letting them do adventurous things, the sort of things that Tom would love to do when he was a boy. And on one occasion we were away beyond the bounds of Loch Monar, about as remote in Scotland as you could get, and we came trundling down the hill. These kids, they're all miners' kids, And at the bottom was a wee man with a Tory bonnet. And as a Scots magazine writer, I knew who it was instantly. And the kids loved him. As soon as they were there, Tom was pointing, see the kestrel up there? And the kids knew about kestrels. And he found them delighted. And one of his Weir's Way programmes, we met up at the quarry above Dollar to do a film on children rock climbing. And he destroyed their faith in television forever. One of the kids was to show doing a hard rock climb, and they wanted a shot of a hand groping round a sharp corner of rock. And they did it with a lad lying flat on the ground round a boulder. You believe everything on television. I also, Tom did another of these programs after I'd done this Ridiculous Monroes in a Single Walk. And we met up by the Loch Sloy Dam. He'd wangled to get the car up there, and everything was set up, the tent I'd used, and I was to sit there pretending to having my tea just after I got back. And Tom trundled down and said, and I'd look up and say, oh, hello, Tom. We did that 12 times before he was satisfied. And that's another thing about him. He was a perfectionist, you know. He worked like a Trojan right from the beginning. He knew what he was going to do. He basically stuck his job in the grocery shop because his mother needed the money. But as soon as it was possible, he was out and away because the hills beckoned. So even learning things, he decided he'd learn to shorthand, for instance. It would help. His sister Molly was an expert at that. So she taught him, and she charged him 2 and 6 an hour. The Weirs were like that. Anyway, from an early age, Tom had his eye on being an explorer. And I think he explored basically his own country first, from one end to the other, and that's something we have to be thankful for. Now, also, one other thing, it's nicely timed, is that this year, sometime in the next few months, an anthology of Tom Weir's writing should appear. It's just to be called Tom Weir, an anthology. And it's collecting writings of his, going right back to things that he wrote and were never published. A wee one, for instance, describing how to make some money. He and a few pals formed a band, skiffle group sort of thing, and went down to the hall with all the Teds and terrifying out of this escapade. And he wrote a wee piece about that. He wrote a piece about bird watching when he was in the artillery in the south of England. He wrote and he wrote and he wrote and he learnt his craft, and it's paid off. So that's something I think we can look forward to as well. And also his photographs. The book's going to be full of photographs. All the different aspects that was Tom Weir. And of course, just to finish, behind every great man is a great woman. And it's lovely to have Rona Weir with us here today. So give her a round of applause.
Hamish Brown, thank you.